At 75 years old, Richard Gere is no longer the face you see splashed across magazines or movie posters. He doesn't chase awards, doesn't promote upcoming releases, doesn't perform for cameras like he used to. These days, he speaks only when there's something real to say. And when he does, it lands with the weight of someone who has spent a lifetime earning his silence. In one rare, quiet moment, he said something that caught the world off guard. "I didn't get divorced because they were wrong," he said. "I got divorced because I wasn't good enough to hold on." There was no press junket, no memoir rollout. Just a man, older, softer, no longer performing, telling the truth. And for a moment, the world stopped pretending it had him all figured out. That sentence didn't trend because it was shocking. It resonated because it was honest, brutally honest. And it came from someone who, for decades, had been the living embodiment of romantic fantasy. The smooth-talking gentleman in Pretty Woman, the smoldering heartthrob in American Gigolo, the quiet strength of an officer and a gentleman. Richard Gere didn't just play these roles. He wore them like a second skin, on screen and off. But that image was only half the story. Behind the charm, behind the elegance, behind the adoring headlines and flawless press photos, was a man who didn't quite know how to stay. A man who knew how to fall in love, but not how to hold it. He could make women feel like they were the center of the universe until the moment they weren't. Not because he stopped caring, but because he didn't yet know how to be still, how to stop running. For much of his life, love was a performance, not a lie, but a role, something he played well, almost too well. And like any role, it ended when the camera stopped rolling. What makes his confession so disarming now isn't that he's admitting failure, it's that he's owning a truth most people never face out loud. Sometimes it's not about the other person. Sometimes the pattern isn't about being unlucky in love. It's about being unready for it. Not immature, not broken, just not yet evolved enough to make room for another person's full self. Because real love doesn't ask you to be impressive, it asks you to be available. And for decades, Richard Gere wasn't. He had the face, he had the words, he had the attention of some of the most desired women in the world. But what he didn't have, what he didn't even realize he was missing, was the capacity to stay present when love became quiet, when it became inconvenient, when it required him to stop moving, stop performing, stop hiding behind charisma. And in the end, that's what he meant when he said he wasn't good enough to hold on. Not that he was cruel, not that he was unloving, but that he hadn't yet become the kind of man who could stand still long enough for love to land. That sentence wasn't just a personal reckoning, it was the doorway into the final, most meaningful chapter of his life. A chapter that didn't begin with a grand romance, but with a pause, a deep breath, a willingness to stop running and finally learn how to sit with himself. Richard Gere didn't fail at love. He just hadn't met the version of himself who was ready to do it right. Not yet. Before the magazine covers and global premieres, Richard Gere was just a lanky, artistic kid from Syracuse, New York. He played the trumpet, wrote music for high school plays, and studied philosophy at the University of Massachusetts. But even then, there was a quiet restlessness in him, a sense that the life he was supposed to live didn't exist yet, and he'd have to go searching for it. He left college before graduating. Theater called to him, not just because of the spotlight, but because it gave him something deeper, permission to be someone else. On stage, he could shed his own uncertainty and slip into a character's confidence. And maybe, without even realizing it, that's when it started. The need to be adored, the habit of disappearing into roles that made him feel more whole than he actually was. When Hollywood came knocking, it wasn't a slow rise, it was an explosion. He had the kind of face you didn't forget. Soulful eyes, quiet intensity, the kind of smile that made people lean in. Casting directors saw it, so did audiences. Richard Gere didn't have to fight to be noticed, he just had to walk into the room. And with fame came women, many of them bold, brilliant, magnetic in their own right. Models, actresses, editors, artists. Some said loving him felt like holding fire. Others called him a jewel shooting across the sky. But none of them stayed. Not because he mistreated them, but because charm without emotional gravity eventually floats away. Richard was always in motion. A film here, a press tour there, retreats in Asia, protests in Tibet, late-night piano sessions alone in hotel rooms. He was constantly reaching for something. Peace maybe, or just a version of himself that didn't exist yet. Love, for him, was real. But it wasn't sustainable. Not back then, because even when he loved, he still played the part of the man women wanted, not the man he truly was. Then came Cindy Crawford. It was 1988 and Richard was 39, famous, magnetic, still very much Hollywood royalty. Cindy was 22, newly famous, impossibly beautiful, and already one of the most photographed women in the world. They met at a barbecue hosted by famed photographer Herb Ritts in Beverly Hills. Two icons from two different universes collided. And for a moment, it felt like fate. They moved in together quickly, setting up a home in New York. Red carpets, magazine spreads, perfume ads. Richard and Cindy became the couple everyone wanted to be. He was elegance, she was allure. Together they were the image of perfection. But beneath the surface, they were living two entirely different timelines. Cindy was still becoming herself. Raised in a small town, thrust into fashion stardom, she was trying to figure out who she was underneath the makeup, the brand deals, the endless camera flashes. She once admitted she had no idea where her public image ended and her real self began. Richard, on the other hand, had already started pulling away from the spotlight. He was growing tired of the attention. Meditation and humanitarian work began to mean more to him than premieres. He craved silence, stillness, a quiet house, not a camera crew. They got married in Las Vegas in 1991. No guests, no gowns, just silver foil rings, and a moment they hoped would glue their worlds together. But marriage, no matter how beautiful, doesn't fix misalignment. When Richard meditated, Cindy flew to photo shoots. When he craved retreat, she was on the runway. They lived together like polite strangers, well-meaning, affectionate, but moving at incompatible speeds. There was no cheating, no scandal, just silence. A slow, mutual drifting apart. And by 1995, the marriage was over. No lawsuits, no press war, just a quiet divorce and one lingering question. How did a couple that perfect fall apart? Decades later, Richard gave the answer no one expected. I loved a woman who didn't yet know who she was, and I thought love could help her find stability, but that was an unfair expectation. No one was the villain, no one was broken. They were just flying at different altitudes, one still climbing, the other already descending. The timing was off. The connection too fragile, the love not yet ready. And once again, Richard Gere walked away with the same feeling he always had. He had loved sincerely, but not well. He had shown up, but not fully. He had tried, but only as the man he was then, not the one he needed to become. After the quiet end of his marriage to Cindy Crawford, Richard Gere retreated from the public spotlight. The red carpets became less frequent, the interviews rare. He seemed to vanish, not dramatically, but deliberately. And then, a new name entered his life, Carrie Lowell. She wasn't a tabloid fixture or a rising fashion icon. Carrie had her own career, her own calm. A former Bond girl in License to Kill, she understood the demands of the public eye, but never seemed consumed by it. Where Richard had grown weary of being seen, Carrie was comfortable not being seen at all. They began dating in the mid-90s. It was slow, deliberate, and for once, grounded. There were no flashy photo shoots or carefully staged appearances, just two people choosing something quieter. In 2000, they had a son, Homer James Jigme Gere. Richard became a father for the first time at 51. It marked a shift, a subtle but profound one. Suddenly, his life had weight, purpose, something real to anchor him. They got married 2 years later in a private ceremony, far from the chaos of celebrity life. No paparazzi, no designer gowns, just a family trying to create something gentle. For over a decade, they lived in Pound Ridge, New York, a rural town surrounded by trees and long drives. Richard tended the garden. Carrie focused on raising their son. And for a while, it worked. But peace sometimes is deceptive. Beneath that tranquil exterior, two very different people were living parallel lives. Richard was profoundly introverted, increasingly drawn to the stillness of meditation, Tibetan retreats, and Buddhist texts. He could spend days in silence, chasing enlightenment. Carrie, while no longer actively working in Hollywood, still craved connection, movement, emotion. Her world was one of expression. His was one of quiet detachment. And slowly the distance crept in, not loud or violent, but steady. They were seen together less. Events were attended separately, their rhythms no longer aligned. And eventually Carrie filed for divorce in 2013, after 11 years of marriage and nearly 2 decades together. The legal process dragged on for 3 years, not because of bitterness, but because of finances, real estate, assets worth over $45 million. But what lingered most wasn't the court proceedings, it was the emotional silence. Richard never lashed out. He never spoke ill of Carrie. But in one later moment of clarity, he offered a quiet truth. When silence lasts too long, it's not peace anymore. It's a signal, and I didn't hear it. There was no betrayal, no explosion, just a man too deep in his own stillness, and a woman quietly fading from the life she no longer felt part of. By the time Richard Gere reemerged in the public eye, it wasn't with a new role or film, it was with someone unexpected by his side, Padma Lakshmi. It was 2014 and Richard was in the middle of finalizing his divorce from Carrie Lowell. Padma, best known as a model, author, and host of Top Chef, was also carrying emotional weight. She had just ended a complex relationship with billionaire Ted Forsman, the man she once described as the spiritual father of her daughter. They met at a charity event. The story goes that they sat backstage for hours, lost in conversation. No flirting, no games, just two people with scars, drawn together not by attraction alone, but by shared weariness. A kind of emotional understanding that bypasses small talk and dives straight into the real. There was no whirlwind romance, no flashy tabloid headlines. They were rarely photographed together, and neither ever publicly confirmed the relationship. But those close to them said it was real, gentle, even healing. For a short time, Richard and Padma found peace in each other. Long dinners, quiet nights, no need to perform. She didn't try to fix him. He didn't ask her to change. And in that simplicity, something rare bloomed, a short, serene interlude between longer, messier chapters. But they were moving in opposite directions. Richard was craving stillness more than ever. He wanted a life out of the spotlight, a house in the woods, meditation at sunrise. Padma, vibrant and deeply engaged in the media world, wasn't ready to slow down. Her life was full of interviews, appearances, and the creative chaos of being a public figure. They ended it without noise. No scandal, no hard feelings, just a soft letting go. A close source summed it up best. They decided it would be better to stay friends. Their lives were too busy in different directions. For Richard, this wasn't a heartbreak. It was a quiet checkpoint, a sign that he no longer chased relationships to fill a void. He didn't need someone to complete him. He wasn't trying to prove anything. And maybe that's when the search began to fade, when the urgency disappeared, when he stopped looking for love and unknowingly made room for it to find him. They say love finds you when you stop looking. And that's exactly how Alejandra Silva entered Richard Gere's life, without force, without performance, without needing to be chased. It was 2014. Richard was still finalizing his divorce from Carrie Lowell. His relationship with Padma had ended gently, and he was no longer in pursuit of anything. Not love, not fame, not redemption. He had retreated into stillness, a man content to grow vegetables, read in silence, and exist without applause. Alejandra Silva was nothing like the women the public once paired him with. She wasn't a supermodel on every magazine cover. She wasn't a Hollywood starlet. She was a Spanish activist, warm, reserved, grounded. She didn't walk into his life with sequins. She came with stories of sleeping on the streets in solidarity with the homeless. A woman who once said, "I don't do charity to be seen. If I can't give my whole self to it, I'd rather not do it at all." Their families had known each other for years, but when they finally met again in Italy, at a hotel her family owned, something had shifted. They were both exhausted, bruised by divorce, and unsure if love still had a place in their lives. But instead of trying to impress her, Richard sent flowers. Every day. Not as a performance, but as a quiet rhythm. He wrote songs for her, handwritten letters, not to win her, but simply to say, "I'm here if you want someone to stay." Alejandra hesitated. She was 33 years younger. She had a son of her own. She knew exactly who Richard Gere was, the icon, the actor, the public figure, and she didn't want to become just another name in his long romantic history. But Richard didn't push. He didn't persuade. He waited. Patiently. Peacefully. And over time, she realized he wasn't performing, he wasn't chasing, he was just being. And in that stillness, she found something she didn't know she needed. They married in 2018 in an intimate Buddhist ceremony. No press release, no media coverage, just family, candles, and silence. Alejandra converted to Buddhism, not because Richard asked her to, but because the teaching spoke to her spirit. She later said, "Meeting Richard felt like someone pulling me out of the dark and showing me the way. I was lost. He was the light. And Richard? He simply said, 'She is the true love of my life.'" So why did it work, after 3 marriages, decades of emotional distance, and a lifetime of quiet heartbreaks? Because this time, there was no chasing, no control, no one trying to become who the other person needed. They met as 2 whole people, not 2 halves hoping to complete each other. Richard didn't need Alejandra to rescue him from solitude, and Alejandra didn't need Richard to validate her purpose. They had both already walked through fire, lost themselves in past relationships, and come out the other side stripped of illusion. There was nothing left to prove. He wrote music for her, not to woo her, but because it made her smile. He still sends her flowers, not to keep her, but to thank her. They don't cling. They don't correct. They just coexist with respect. Richard once said of Alejandra, "She's the funniest, smartest, most sensitive, brave woman who knows what she wants. I don't need her to be anyone else." And she calls him the kindest man I've ever met. They live quietly in the same Pound Ridge farmhouse, where he once tried to make other marriages work. But this time, the doors are open. The space isn't filled with roles or expectations, just children laughing, meditation at sunrise, quiet walks, evenings where nobody is trying to fix the other. They're different. Richard is deeply introverted, often silent for hours, lost in thought. Alejandra is outwardly engaged, passionate about human rights and public service. But instead of trying to become the same, they chose to honor each other's rhythm. This wasn't a story of passion exploding into life. It was something softer, something deeper. The kind of love that arrives not to change your world, but to join it, quietly. Because when 2 people stop trying to hold on too tightly, they finally learn how to stay. These days, Richard Gere doesn't act much. He doesn't do press tours, he doesn't walk red carpets, and he doesn't need to. He lives quietly in Pound Ridge, New York, with his wife, Alejandra Silva, and their 2 sons. He wakes up early, makes tea, walks the dog, plays piano for the kids in the evening. No paparazzi, no assistance, just peace. He still supports humanitarian causes, especially Tibet and homelessness, but without the spotlight. No speeches, no red carpets, just quiet giving. He doesn't need applause anymore. He's not acting. He's living. Alejandra runs a foundation in Spain. They don't show off their love. They don't post to be seen. And yet, everything about their life speaks louder than any headline ever could. Richard Gere once said, "I don't need to be in Hollywood to know I still exist." And maybe, that's when he finally became the man love could stay with. Which chapter of Richard Gere's love life struck you most? Was it Cindy Crawford, Carrie Lowell, or the quiet depth of Alejandra Silva? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe love shows up when we finally stop chasing it, comment, "Yes, I think so." Tap like, hit subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, because the next story might change how you see someone you thought you already knew.